This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. When you're in academics, in my area of academics, forensics in particular, in order to kind of validate yourself, I guess, professionally, one of the things that's required is that you go to meetings. We always have meetings, right? You have these meetings that you attend with colleagues from all over the country, all over the world. And you listen to papers. Saying you listen to papers is kind of odd, but you do. You listen to studies that have been conducted by colleagues in different areas. And one of the coolest meetings that you can ever go to is the American Academy of Forensic Science. And several years back, I attended the AAFS conference. I think it was, in New Orleans all those years ago. And I went to a talk by a forensic odontologist. This guy was from out west. And as you know, odontologists not only examine the human mouth in order to determine identity, but they also examine bodies for bite marks. And this was an unusual talk because he was talking about an attack. But the attack that he was talking about had nothing to do with the attacker being a human. You see, this odontologist was from Colorado, and the case that he was talking about happened to be one of the most ghastly cases I've ever seen in a presentation, and it had to do with a jogger who was attacked by a mountain lion. Don't know that I've ever seen the like, don't know that I've ever seen injuries like that, but I do know this. During the course of that talk, given all the horrible things I'd seen, the one thing that never came up was a mountain lion digging a shallow grave. Today, we're going to talk about the forensics surrounding the Suzanne Morphew case. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Well, we're back in the saddle. We're back from CrimeCon, and boy, what news did we come home to? The Suzanne Morphew case. And look, we've been talking on different platforms for, these many years, months. Did you see this coming? Did you even expect to get this news?
No, not even close. And Joe, as you mentioned, we have been on this since it happened. Since Suzanne Morphew went missing that first day, we have been on this case. Happened on Mother's Day. When a mother goes missing on Mother's Day, that is going to be a huge flag up in the air, all hands on deck. And we have been ever since. It's like many, many cases, they get more play in the media if you've got pictures. Look, Suzanne Morphew is a very attractive 49-year-old woman, and her husband, an attractive man, Barry. They've got two beautiful daughters. They've been married 25 years. This is a scenario where, hey, man, Barry is at work that day. She goes for a bike ride and goes missing. On the outside looking in, this is a horrible accident of something. She's been abducted. She has been attacked. I mean, what happened to Suzanne Morphew? And we weren't the only ones, Joe. Holy moly. There was a football team size of reporters from around the country that headed to Colorado when this first happened. And the whole thought was, where is she?
Yeah, and she just seemingly vanished into thin air. It had been put out there that on Mother's Day, she was going for a bike ride. And you would think that there would be something to kind of hang your intellectual hat on with that. And soon we actually found out that they had recovered a bike, I think.
I don't know who suggested she was on a bike ride. I don't know if that came from Barry Morphew, from the next door neighbor, or whomever. All we know is that Barry Morphew was out of town on business, a construction job. And Suzanne, he couldn't reach Suzanne by the phone. And so I guess he called a neighbor. Would you look and see if you see her? And then, is her bike there? No, her bike's not there. She must have gone on a bike ride. So they're checking the bike trail, and that's where they find a bike. And deputies found the bike. And I told you this a little while ago. I was watching the video because I wanted to know Barry's demeanor when they find the bike. And it's already dark as Barry gets there on site. He asks basic questions. Where did you find it? What condition was the bike in? And Joe, 28 seconds after he gets out of his truck, he says, could it have been a mountain lion attacking her on her bike? That was 28 seconds into Barry Morphew's part of the investigation. Could a mountain lion grab a bike rider and drag their body to where we can't find it?
Well, this is the thing about in a mountain lion out there, you hear this term apex predator that's thrown around down in my area of the country. The apex predator in our area are certainly alligators, I think, where I come from. They're kind of the top of the heap. And they have a particular way that if they're going to attack something, it's kind of ingrained into their DNA as to how they go about it. And out in that area, I would think that a mountain lion would be at the top. They would be the apex predator out in that region. I guess you could argue that a bear would be. Here's kind of the curious thing that I learned, and I think back to that talk that I sat in all those years ago. And the way it was described to me is that most of the time when these things attack, they love to attack from a height. The way this is kind of structured out, my understanding at least, as best as I can, is that they will sit perhaps on like a rocky outcropping and they will wait until a prey come through their particular area, their hunting grounds. And they sit there very quietly and they wait until the prey passes them. And the next thing you know, they're on the back of this thing, whatever it is that they're after. That's the way this lady was attacked out in Colorado, who was actually a jogger that was running through the woods they had like one of those outdoor running paths that goes through the tree line, and it's real lovely to see. And they showed images and it was, the only thing about it's had a big rock outcropping where this thing kind of sat up above. And that's the way they attacked. I can't imagine, and I guess it could happen. I'm not an animal behaviorist, but there are cars that are going by in that area because it's adjacent to a road where this bicycle was found, kind of down in a gully, that sort of thing. I can't imagine there would be a place for a mountain lion to sit there and wait. And it's very disruptive, right? In that hunting area, with cars going by and all of that stuff. Now, this is a very, you're south of Gunnison, Colorado here. It is desolate, and it's beautiful, but it's desolate. You're just south of where the ski slopes are and all that sort of stuff. Beautiful countryside, but very isolated. So this thing is sitting adjacent to the roadway waiting for a bicyclist to come by. And I don't necessarily know that mountain lion would have been my first choice. I mean, to each his own, but if you're checking off the list and you're thinking apex predator, I guess that could happen.
I don't think it was anybody's first list, Joe. I think you're right. I think the deputies looked at one another like, where is this coming from? And one thing I looked at right when this happened, as we were investigating, is that mountain lions are very territorial, and they don't share. They actually have, this is my area, and you don't come here. They go find another area. They're very spread out. In this entire area that we're talking about here, miles upon miles upon miles, there's only 3 mountain lions in this whole area. And I dare say they're not going against their hunting style by hunting in a ravine, in a ditch, on gravel and bushes.
I can't feature that. And I can only imagine their range has got to be massive that they cover, that they have laid their claim to. So they're out there protecting what is theirs. Here's the problem is that when this bike is discovered, there's no evidence that an attack has necessarily taken place relative to this apex predator. All you got is singularly a bike, and it's distinctly hers. Apparently it's a bike that she had used, Suzanne, that is. And so that, gives you pause. And I think that the next thing you talk about apex predators, first thing that comes to mind for me, aside from a wild beast, is going to be another beast, and that's a human being. So are we talking about somebody that had snatched her while she was out riding the bike? Who would be that bold in order to do that? And how did he get her off the bike? Did they bump her, get her off the road, maybe take the bike and discard it off in this kind of unseen area? I don't know, but it struck me as very odd at the time, I have to say.
It struck everybody that way. And which is why there was this huge investigation. Right away, Joe, when we look at the timeline here, breaking it down, May 10th is when she disappeared. On May 11th, search efforts are ongoing. They brought out the drones. They brought out scent tracking dogs. Family of Suzanne offers up $200,000 in reward money on the 14th. We're talking less than a week into it. they're offering up $200,000 for information. That doesn't usually happen that quickly. So in trying to get this information, Joe, very quickly within a couple of days, we start finding things. On May 15th, some personal items of Suzanne Morphew's were found in and around the search area. They had May 17th, the sheriff's dive and rescue team searched waters and water sites and things like that. I guess there's a normal pathway to searching an outdoor area of the groups that you call in, from volunteers searching the ground, drones in the air, horseback, dogs, things like that. And they went everywhere. Nothing was found. In terms of her, they found her helmet.
Yeah, and they found the helmet. When you think about kind of the intimate nature, and I'm talking about this from a physical standpoint of a bike helmet, it's in direct contact with obviously the head, but that layer beneath there, the scalp, you have the hair. And if there's any kind of trauma that might be associated with the head, where you have an open wound, you'll have blood contained within that helmet. I haven't heard over the course of this investigation that when this helmet was discovered that there was necessarily any kind of evidence, biological evidence like that, that would indicate trauma. Where you've got a tremendous amount of blood or something like that that's kind of staining the interior of this thing. So I'd have a real hard time putting that together, I think.
When the search, I don't want to say it ended because I don't think they ever stopped looking, but the active searches of actually, let's partner up and go and walk this area, they were really worried about the weather turning on them, and it did because of the area they live in. As you mentioned, they pipe in the sunshine. This case didn't necessarily go cold, but it actually, when nothing turned up, when no body turned up, and the police kept saying, surely we're going to find something, and nothing was found. All of a sudden, you've got the weather turning and them saying, well, we'll have a better shot after the snow melts again. And here we are a couple of years later, and we finally get the story that you mentioned right at the very beginning. After a couple of years of waiting, now there's a body. What are we going to find, Joe? For real, after all this time, what can we possibly expect to find of Suzanne Morphew?
Well, obviously, after so much time and so much exposure let's face it, Dave, in a very, very harsh environment, there's not going to be an intact body. But here's what I do know. The location where she was found, the circumstances in which she was found, defy anything that to date I have covered on Body Bags. As a death investigator, when you have a body that has been left behind, if you will, in whatever state, condition that it is, it's not just the perpetrator that you're trying to outwit. You're fighting nature. In Suzanne Morphew's case, Dave, I got to say, I think that I don't know of any case where you have so many issues that investigators are facing where every single element within nature is fighting against you to eradicate anything that is left behind, that is the remains of Suzanne Morphew.
All right, Joe, when we get down to the nitty gritty here, the shallow grave that seems to pop up in stories like this, we have somebody, has been no trial so far. There has been an arrest made previously, but then that was before trial, that was thrown out. And so we're really back at square one. And I wondered at the time, how do you move forward on a trial about a murder if you don't have a body?
Yeah, it's difficult, and we've used this term before. I think I like saying it, corpus delecti, which is the body of the crime, and it's been applied over the years. How do you prosecute something? The prosecution would always want to have that because that is singularly the biggest piece of evidence that you have because the body is telling you things. But in this particular case now, Dave, we can confirm that we do, in fact, have a corpus delecti. We do, in fact, have the remains of Suzanne Morphew.
And that actually was the reason, I guess, they didn't move forward previously, was that they have a case, but we don't have the body. So now we have the body. And we know that the body was found. And I I don't want to refer to Suzanne Morphew as it, but we are talking about what the remains of the person that she used to be, the physical remains. Her remains were discarded in a shallow grave. Having dug a hole in the desert, I've dug holes in a lot of different places because I'm a guy. And when guys are little boys, we dig. I don't know why we do that.
Yeah, I don't understand it either, but we do. That's part of what we do. That's the nature of it. And you said a lot, I think, regarding this from an environmental standpoint, where Suzanne's remains are actually found. The composition of the soil out there is, to say that it is tightly packed is understatement. And here's what's fascinating. According to what I'm hearing right now, the area in which the remains were found, it's not like it's in a grove of trees necessarily. You're talking about a low-growth brush, which there's a lot of out there, and it's sparse. There's not like when you think about eastern forest, where you've got this blanket of pine straw or leaves or something like that, where things you would think would be easily concealed. You're not dealing with an environment like that. You're dealing in an area it's almost desert-like, I think, to a certain degree, tightly packed, sandy clay kind of composition of the soil. And here's the important thing, that the police, when they first let this news out, they stated that this was, in fact, a shallow. Now, that's a very specific identifier, Dave. Very specific. They're not saying a well-dug grave. They're not saying that it was deep. They're saying shallow. And shallow implies a couple of things to me.
In a hurry?
Yes, specifically. You're rushed. I mean, just think about anything you do in life where you're unprepared, okay? You're unprepared, and really dig deep when you're unprepared. And it doesn't matter what your pursuit is. So for me, there's two things that come into play. You're in a rush, and you might not have the tools that you would need at hand in order to defeat this obstacle, which is, in fact, the ground, the earth, in order to facilitate a deep grave. Maybe you're up against time. Whoever did this, whoever dug this grave, because I can assure you, Dave, they're calling it a grave. And how do we define a grave? Well, they're going to have the Colorado Bureau of Investigation that's out there working this thing. I would imagine that they're going to have people out there that have a background I don't know if it's at a doctoral level, but they'll have people that are out there on site, have a background in clandestine graves and the processing of clandestine graves. They might even have a forensic anthropologist out there. And when we define a grave, we begin to think about it from the perspective of a grave is outlined in the earth, so it actually has margins to it. Sometimes those margins can be very sharp. Sometimes the dimensions of it can be very robust. However, when you think about a shallow grave, you think, well, how do we accomplish this? What tools would we need? And if you're talking about hand tools, well, just on the surface of it, I think that in order to really have one in place, you're going to need probably a shovel and maybe a pickaxe out in this environment. And what comes along with that? Well, when you begin to create this hole in the earth that has never been there before, it's going to require of the individual a lot of heavy lifting relative to how much work goes into this. And you're going to have tool strikes that are on the earth. As a matter of fact, if there's like a rock, what we refer to as like a deciduous rock that's kind of sitting free in the earth, and you come down on that rock with either a shovel. I mean, we've all been in our backyard and you've been digging a hole and you strike something underneath the earth and that rock is left behind. Guess what it leaves behind on the surface of that rock? It leaves behind a tool mark. And if they went out there and during their excavation of this area, they recovered any rocks, for instance, that have tool strikes on them, trust me, buddy, they've recovered these things. The trick is, are you going to be able to marry up a tool, whether it's a pickaxe or shovel, that might match up to any kind of tool mark that's on a rock, perhaps? So that's going to be interesting to see as time goes forward.
At the time they found Suzanne Morphew in the shallow grave, investigators were not looking for Suzanne Morphew. They were investigating something else. And based on the shallow grave, and I'm in my head seeing that there had to have been a hump in the ground. When they were out there looking, shallow grave means that they did not have room to actually really conceal the body. and investigators looking for something else see disturbed area over here. And I'm thinking it might be kind of like when you're a kid and you try to bury something in the backyard and, there is a hump. It's like you can't dig it deep enough, which I'm guessing that's what had to have happened here. But a grave that is like that, Joe, wouldn't body still be exposed to all of the elements of a body being left almost on top of the surface?
Yeah. And I got to tell you, I disagree with the idea of there being a hump. And this is an important part to this. Because when you think about digging a grave, most people think when you fill this thing in with the body, you have a mound that is created, a hump. But here's what happens. You might come across earth that has never had a tool put to it in thousands of years, perhaps. It's pristine. Now you're creating this defect in the earth. And guess what happens? You can never compact that soil back to the original form that it was in. You place a body into this area, and for a while, it will have this kind of raised appearance to it. But let me tell you what happens then. Then the area begins to cave in. One of the things they're going to notice is that it is not a kind of a humped area or a mounded area. It's a sunken area, Dave. And all of the vegetation around it, perhaps, I don't know. We're talking about a 3-year cycle now because Suzanne's been missing for 3 years. What happens is the vegetation actually changes around that area. It's demarcated. Like if there were like little scrub plants that are an indigenous flora that are in there, their life within that area, their possessive relative to the plants, is pulled out. You've disturbed that area. It's disturbed soil and it's disturbed plant life. So it's going to look different than, say, for instance, something that has remained untouched for thousands of years. It will stand out. But here's the thing, Dave. There's something more sinister about this because they wouldn't have seen a hump. They wouldn't have seen a mound. What they would have seen is a depressed hole, and it no longer contained the intact remains of Suzanne Morphew. If people at home will just envision in your mind just for a second, envision an old-fashioned wagon wheel, okay, where you've got that central hub. That's the shallow grave. The hub is the shallow grave, and all the little spokes that come off of the old wagon wheel, that's going to be body disbursement or skeletal disbursement. So from that point in time where the body was buried, the body began to decay. And as it began to decay, even early on, the animal life in that particular area that is indigenous to that area, scavengers in particular, it will be in the wind. They will pick it up almost instantaneously. The spectrum that the wildlife work on relative to their sense of smell is beyond anything that we can actually imagine. They live and die by the smell within their environment. And so they would have picked up on this very quickly. If there was any effort, and I can assume that there probably was, since we have a grave, there would have been an effort to bury or cover up. That's not going to defeat the sense of smell that inhabits this area on the part of these indigenous animals.
Are you going to be able to tell whether or not the body was dismembered before going in? I mean, is that a possibility that they would pick up the parts and run with them as opposed to the body naturally being torn apart by wild animals?
Yeah, and it comes back to the skill set that I've talked about many times on our show, unfortunately, and that is tool marks. If there was a dismemberment that had taken place, you would see evidence of that on the bones. Now, one of the things that you will see on the bones, on skeletal remains, and you see it in all cases. I don't know about this case in particular because they have not released everything yet. You would see carnivore activity. We can see things like any type of animal. If you're talking about raccoons, possums, any kind of ground-dwelling animals that burrow, that sort of thing, that are indigenous to that area, they leave behind specific markings on the surface of bone. You can look at it and get an idea what species was feasting, essentially, on skeletal remains, because there's actually little scrape and tooth marks on there. And the fact that her body has been allegedly dispersed over a 75-yard radius. It tells me also that they have not recovered everything. There's 206 bones in the human body. And just think of it this way. The smaller the bone, the higher the probability is you won't recover it. And I know the big thing that everybody wants to know about is a hyoid bone in Suzanne Morphew's case. Those bones are so fine, and there's a term that we use called gracile, which means delicate. And it doesn't matter if it's male or female. With the hyoid bone, it is so very fine, and it's that indicator that you look for to see if there has been a strangulation event where it's fractured. It would be one of at the top of the list to kind of vanish, disappear, because it's something that a small animal can make off with, and they would take this away. If they found a hyoid out there, I would be genuinely surprised that they had. The small bones of the hands and of the feet, those are going to be items that will be, again, dispersed all over the place. Animals will literally take skeletal remains to their burrows and take them underground. And certain things are just never recovered. And each little bit of human bone tells a story. And it's kind of an obvious thing to say, but the more the constituted body that you can have, you're going to increase the likelihood that you're going to get some idea as to what happened to this individual and to any individual, not just the remains of Suzanne Morphew. So
what about birds coming into play? Because I see them in my neighborhood flying around with pieces of food. They're flying around.
We've got scavenger animals that are out there. You think about crows in particular, and not to mention the big scavenger animals like buzzards and those sorts of things that are out there. Here's a kind of an interesting little aside that I've actually borne witness to. I worked a case many years ago, and this has been proven out in the literature as well. I worked a case many years ago where we had a clandestine grave, and most of the hair was gone. And Dave, there were anthropologists that checked the bird nest. And we had 2 or 3 bird nests in that area where we had young officers that were willing to climb up a tree, and 2 out of those 3 bird nests that they found had human hair in the bird nest that they had nested with. And so nature makes use of what is at hand. And just think you're a bird in the springtime. You're trying to build a nest to welcome hatchlings and that sort of thing. This is prime. It's one of the things that would be taken back. I was truly amazed that from the moment in time that we knew that they had a human remain that was out there, and granted, I know I'm going to get this number wrong. I won't give the specific number, but I will say it was more than 20 miles away from her home, the body of Suzanne Morphew. It was a great distance away from her home. They have this body in this isolated area. You think about what are the odds that they're going to find her in the first place. And then they did find her. And from the moment that they did find her until we had a positive identification was really quick. And what can we kind of surmise from that? Well, it first came out that Suzanne's remains had been identified, I think, with dental identification. That tells us something very significant there, Dave. And then it was confirmed, I think, further confirmatory evidence was the fact that they found port for the application of cancer drugs.
Let me ask you, Joe, 45 miles, I looked it up, just 45 miles between her home and where her remains were found. But does the fact they identified her body by her teeth, that does not indicate a full skull, but at least indicates partial, right? At least?
Yeah, it does. And that's significant because when we think of our skull, I think most people think of the totality of our skull relative to the jaw and the cranium. Teeth that you have in your lower jaw are called mandibulary teeth. So because that's the mandible. And then the upper teeth that you have, those are called maxillary teeth. So you have the maxillary teeth up top and then the mandibulary teeth down below. Here's the thing about it is that the jaw becomes disarticulated pretty quickly in decomposition that is also in concert with scavenger activity. The fact that they were able to get her body identified from dental is quite fascinating to me. So that tells me that they have at least one component of the skull. I don't know if they have both the mandibulary teeth as well as the maxillary teeth, but they had enough dental evidence there to turn this around pretty quickly. And and this is horrible, I know, but when you look at this woman, you see that beautiful smile. She smiles in almost every one of her images, she had this beautiful set of teeth. You know that she's had dental care. And that's significant because people will say things, well, why don't you just use DNA to get a body identified? Well, why don't you just use dentistry to get, okay, we will. But here's the problem. First off, you have to have an idea of who the person might be. And then if that's the case, you have to have something in the antemortem state, which is before death, to compare it to with what you have in the postmortem state. Obviously, they've got dental records. And the way bodies are identified through dental examination, first off, there's actually a dental chart that is created for the dead. Teeth that are absent are just as significant as teeth that are present. The trick is you have to determine, were those teeth absent in life? Let's say you've got, I don't know, your third molar. You've got your wisdom teeth that have been removed. And I know there's so many people in the audience that have had their wisdom teeth removed. Well, you are different if you've had your wisdom teeth removed as opposed to the rest of the population that still has those. So check that box. Then you think about cavities. Well, how many restorations have they had? What doctor did these types of restorations? Did they use a particular type of methodology or a particular technique that is unique to that doctor? You look at the planes of the teeth. How are they rotated? How are they pitched? And that's determined on x-ray. Any kind of what's referred to as carious dentition. Maybe you've got a cavity that's never been repaired, or maybe you've got capped teeth. Many people have capped teeth now. So all of these things come into play that are very unique to a particular individual. When you begin to look at the teeth and try to determine who they are, that's significant. And then you couple that, Dave, it's a confirmatory thing. When you think about, we know that Suzanne Morphew fought cancer. And so she's even got a cancer port that is indwelling. Well, this thing is made out of plastic. And guess what, buddy? Plastic takes a long time to degrade and decompose.
So on top of all of what you just named, Joe, as ways to identify, is there going to be enough left of Suzanne Morphew's remains to determine a cause of death?
In a perfect world, what we would want would be soft tissue. And I can tell you, I'd be very surprised if there was any soft tissue left after 3 years in such an austere environment in which she was found. Because, we look for various types of trauma on the surface, focal areas of hemorrhage. We look for injuries that have occurred like cuts or maybe puncture wounds or gunshot wounds. Absent soft tissue, you really have to be heavily dependent upon bone at that point in time in a case like this. Well, what are you looking for? Well, are there any cracked ribs? And if those ribs are cracked, did it happen in life, in the antemortem state? Is this a pre-existing injury that had healed, or was it in the perimortem state, which is that area between life and death where life is leaving you? Can you recover all of the ribs? Did you recover the sternum, which is breastbone? Is there a hole in the sternum? And I think what everybody's really curious about, was there damage to the skull? Remember, we've got some element of the skull. They've got a dental ID, Dave. I don't think they did this based on a singular tooth that they found out there. So with the skull, with skeletal remains, that's going to be your biggest tell if you have one that's intact. So what are you looking for? A depressed skull fracture? You're looking for perhaps evidence of a gunshot wound. But beyond that, it's really going to be difficult to come up with a definitive cause of death unless you have something that's really presenting on the skeletal remains. Because if you're thinking about, say, for instance, a strangulation, how are you going to make that determination? Well, we've already talked about the hyoid bone. If they found it, which I hope they did, was it intact? Is there evidence that it fractured? Not every hyoid bone fractures with asphyxiation. There's no soft tissue to see the hemorrhage because we're so far down the tracks. I'd be very shocked if any soft tissue existed, though, to make that determination.
Is there any possibility that the person who did this, the person who murdered Suzanne Morphew, actually has had her body someplace else for the last couple of years, and only in the last 6 months decided to take the body out and bury it in a shallow grave?
That is a fantastic question, and it's something that I thought about before we decided to lay down this track. I suppose that it would be within the realm of possibility, however highly unlikely. It seems to me that this is the way I would look at it as an investigator. If you've had a body that you have been holding back for a protracted period of time, doesn't it seem logical that if you finally decided to take the remain and bury it after all this period of time, that you would first off show up prepared, tool-wise, to take that body to the spot that you've identified, and I mean really prep the grave, get down into that soil, really dig it out, make it deep, make it so that it is not shallow, and really hide that body away at a sufficient depth to where it's not going to be discovered. And I don't see that necessarily happening. This implies, and we go back to our earlier point, this implies to me that this was done perhaps with speed, but I do know this. As the days begin to unfold, we will anxiously be waiting to see what further information Suzanne Morphew's remains can offer up. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.